right? Yeah, it doesn't hurt. We're back with Second Samuel. And I didn't make any a PowerPoint or anything because it's really just the kind of should flow straight in from First Samuel. I've probably said it a few times now. This was all one book. It was divided into two scrolls, kind of like how you collected VHS in the 90s. If you got Titanic or Heat or any Martin Scorsese movie or Dances with Wolves, you know how they always came in two VHS and you were like, where are they going to break the movie at? Those days are long gone. That's exactly what's going on here. So it's not like it's two different writers or anything like that. It's just literally just
Are there other books that they've done that with?
I'm sure there are, and I can't tell you off the top of my head. Yeah, but it'd be worth doing a quick Google.
Like we see
First and Second Kings. That could possibly be it. Absolutely, right. Yeah. First and Second Corinthians, the letters are different.
Yeah.
Because they usually are a second letter to the same people.
Oh, okay.
That said, one of the letters of Paul, I think it's First Corinthians, there's some disagreement among scholars whether or not that's many letters that were spliced together by an editor at some point. We thought they were kind of they cut off the greetings and the goodbyes and they kind of put the content all into one letter. So yeah, but I bet a light little search, if I've got time, can answer that question. It's a good question. But it is also just a great tangible reminder of the physicality of these books, which was you had to go to them. I mean, again, I know I say these all the time, but it's just worth repeating. You had to go to the temple to hear the scripture. You didn't have a copy at home. You certainly didn't have an iPod or iPhone with it that you could search for. You had to go to temple to hear the scripture. It's the only place you could hear it. Only the rabbis could read it. And it was oral. So you had to really dig into those repetitions. The reason the repeating here, we would have cleaned this up in editing, at Penguin Random House for sure. But the repetition here was intentional so that people could kind of get the message that they were trying to make. And then it was all read on scrolls, and as Mary knows and have demonstrated here in the past, you kind of roll it up from left to right, put it behind a curtain and treat it as if it's, the literal word of God present in the room, just much like we do with the bread in the tabernacle upstairs. It's kind of treated with the same reverence, right?
Yes. And sometimes people are going to have to learn that corporal has to go to ground. He has to ground.
Yes.
I have that issue every Sunday. Well, it's not dirty. We can use it again. No,
maybe Brad Bell will know what to do, right? Yeah. Now he's going to watch this video online and be like, what? I haven't signed up for it. So anyway, we're back with Second Samuel, and I'll start with the NRSV unless anybody has any questions. And we'll see where we are. If you were, you're previously on, or if this was a two-parter, Saul had just died. Samuel, of course, died far earlier. So the name of these books is kind of a misnomer as well, but that is what it is. It's because it all began with Samuel. All right, chapter 1. After the death of Saul, when David had returned from defeating the Amalekites, David remained 2 days in Ziklag. On the third day, a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. When he came to David, he fell on the ground and did obeisance. David said to him, "Where have you come from?" He said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." David answered him, "How did things go? Tell me." He answered, "The army fled from the battle, but also many of the army fell and died. And Saul and his son Jonathan also died." Then David asked the young man who was reporting to him, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan died?" The young man reporting to him said, "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on his spear, while the chariots and the horsemen drew close to him. When he looked behind him, he saw me and called to me. I answered, 'Here, sir.' And he said to me, 'Who are you?' I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' He said to me, 'Come, stand over me and kill me, for convulsions have seized me, and yet my life still lingers. So I stood over him and killed him, for I knew that he could not live after he had fallen. I took the crown that was on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord. Then David took hold of his clothes and tore them, and all the men who were with him did the same. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who had reported to him, "Where do you come from?" He answered, "I am the son of a resident alien, an Amalekite." David said to him, "Were you not afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Then David called one of the young men and said, "Come here and strike him down." So he struck him down, and he died. David said to him, "Your blood be on your head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed." David intoned this lamentation over Saul and his son Jonathan. He ordered that the song of the bow be taught to the people of Judah. It is written in the book of Jashar. He said, "Your glory, O Israel, lies slain upon your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, where the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice. The daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. You mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor bounteous fields. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul, anointed with oil no more. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, nor the sword of Saul return empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you with crimson and luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. And there's some conflict of where the chapter ends, but I think that seems like the nice ending for chapter 1. All right, there's a lot in here, and it seemed like all kind of one thought, so that's why I went ahead and read the whole thing. But probably you've heard the phrase, "How the mighty have fallen."
Mhm.
Lo and behold, it came from scripture. And it's like a refrain in the song. That's part of the legacy of David. Again, he's attributed to be the composer of the Psalms. So it kind of retrofitted back into the story a bit, that when David is feeling emotional, that he's going to break into song, that it might end up being a psalm. And I'm going to look at my notes to see if that's the case here. Probably not.
And Greg, just as a matter of information, there was speculation about which other books in the Bible might have been two books that were separated into one. And I just did a quick Google search. Well, also in the New Testament, the Luke Acts is generally considered one book that's been separated. And as far as in the Old Testament, there are several books that are separated in our English Bibles, but that were not separated in Jewish Bibles. And they are 1st and 2nd Kings, Ezra, Nehemiah, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So
Wow.
Okay. So that's just to get that off.
Wouldn't they be separated in the Jewish Bible?
Oh, because they were originally one,
That's the
so
original.
they wanted to honor that it was
Oh,
one. So
okay.
yeah, it just means you open a Bible, it's probably Kings altogether,
Mhm.
Ah, okay.
Maybe not, maybe more modern books. Yeah,
Thank you.
probably more historic. A good question for a rabbi, especially if,
Or the
you know,
question might be phrased, why did we separate them?
yes, yeah. Why did Christians muck it up, right?
And where did we find the spot to separate?
Yes, exactly.
Particularly in Ezra and Jeremiah.
1st and 2nd Chronicles are basically the exact same material as 1st and 2nd Kings, just retold. So,
Yeah,
if there's
from a different context, a different
from a different
perspective.
context, exactly right.
Yeah. It's interesting, this whole song, this poem that David engages in. It's very much like a lot of eulogies. Saul, who had been such a thorn and was such a problem and was rejected by God, but he's praised the high heavens in this particular eulogy by David. It's really kind of interesting.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me going there, knowing this group, it's about how we would probably treat the funeral of a president of the United States that we didn't really care for. There's probably many for some of us. But at the same time, you have to respect that a duly elected president, this number, of the presidency has died. And so we have a state funeral, we do it at the National Cathedral. We go through these mourning periods. It's just same with the monarchies, with England. Hard to find many people that didn't like Queen Elizabeth, I'm thinking, but probably don't like the monarchy, not her per se. But that happens. Maybe popes. Maybe your feelings on Benedict, for example. You still have to kind of honor the office that they held. That's kind of my read on this. It's also maybe you could argue maybe a little political on David's part. He knows he's got an audience there to hear the song, but more likely is the song existed first. I bet of all this material, that song was out there. And so much of the story, especially this first part of chapter 1, is to get us into how to get to that, the writing, the composition of that piece of music. I don't think you're intended to dwell on David's, this is troublesome, what he does to the messenger.
Yeah.
That bothered me.
But I didn't understand why.
The messenger, also from scripture, right? But it's more, and it's all there to say, to realize the importance of what you've done, even though the messenger didn't get a chance to say, I put him out of his misery. He's still, in David's eyes, it's like you helped, it's like you euthanized the king, and that was one of the Lord's anointed. Only the Lord can take a life. So there's some kind of thorny real world issues here about end of life issues in some way, but it's not so much about David's killing as it is about the respect for the office of the king. Yeah.
I think when I read line 12 here, I think that supports what you're saying, because it said they mourned and wept for Saul and Jonathan, but also for the army of the Lord. And then I underlined for the house of Israel.
Yeah.
So I think part of this is that the king of Israel was defeated.
Exactly.
And so that's an occasion worth mourning. For
Yeah.
him, right?
And what's gonna happen to Israel because of this? Yeah.
Right.
Wasn't David already dedicated? Wasn't David already supposed to be king, and take the place of Saul as per what Samuel did in anointing him years before? But I always got a little confused with that, because it was like, well, Saul's gone now, so David now can take his place, and it didn't seem like David was just jumping at the bit to take his livelihood into the kingdom, or to the Israel.
Observation. Yeah.
Or at least he wasn't publicly professing that,
Yeah,
he
in
was
public,
being
he's
circumspect.
And crying. Yes.
The other thing
I
is,
think-
David may have been anointed to be king, but yet Jonathan, as long as Jonathan lived,
Is the son.
he's the son of Saul.
Right.
So kind of what I got here was they both had to perish in this battle,
Yeah.
so that the prophecy of David becoming king
Right.
could be carried out.
Yeah. And to what Charity was saying about praying for Israel, at the moment, their leadership has been decapitated. I don't mean that literally, although we do know that
Yeah,
happened
yeah, it
afterwards,
was.
right? But they don't have it's like they don't have a government. I mean, this is like if we lost the president, vice president, speaker of the house.
Right, yeah, it's kind of the same thing.
It's
like,
not
oh, where do we
unlike-
go now?
It's a little bit of like how, I know I'm harping on the presidents, but I think it's just such a great analogy for us. It's a bit how Lyndon Johnson had to behave, November 23rd, 24th. There's part of him that's like secretly happy he's president, But the circumstances are he has to kind of show some public mourning and be the comforter in chief at first before he can, you know, measure the drapes in the White House. Yeah. There's a bit of that going on. Politics, you know. But you're right.
This,
Privately, he's probably excited.
this passage was a little uncomfortable for me when they were kind of glorying in how
Yeah.
Jonathan's bow never wavered from the blood of the slain, from the
Yeah.
gore of the warriors. It kind of really glorifies violence and death and
Absolutely.
battle. So this is a little uncomfortable for me in the context of the where I live today in the New Testament era, the era of Jesus. And so yeah,
Pacifism.
so yeah.
You're right. This is that's a great observation. This could be maybe not the one you go to when you think of it. Usually people go to the book of Joshua to argue in favor of just war. But this could be a passage where you say, you know, this is the Bible glorifies war, and it's more accurate to say, well, 1st and 2nd Samuel glorify war. You know, the Old Testament, it's considered an honor probably to die in battle in this way. But the secret is, and now I wonder too, you know, if I was doing the movie version of this, you could say David had to get rid of the messenger because the messenger tells an unfavorable story about Saul, which is that he couldn't even die on his own. He couldn't even kill himself properly. So there's something a little, even at the end, there's some kind of little frustrating embarrassment, and that the messenger had to literally help him die, and that he had to kill himself, which is wrapped up with its own things. He didn't die a noble death, let's say. So maybe you could see politically David kind of going like, and we'll just kill the messenger, and then no one will know exactly how this happened. Maybe.
Yeah.
Probably not, David.
No, I'm agreeing with you. And I
Yeah.
think it just makes me extremely uncomfortable that not only, you know, was it that the whole thing glorified what, you know, the deaths that Jonathan and Saul
Right.
visited on the other people, but the fact that a guy simply brings a message and David just says, well, you're going to die because, you know, that obviously, because you're an Amalekite. Yeah.
Exactly. And then of course in there, you know, we've talked about this at length, verse 26, you get another thing where, again, if I'm imagining this as theater or a movie, David sings it or chants it or says it as refrain. And I wonder if all these people are kind of bowing their heads in a prayer and then they kind of open their eyes and look like this. Going, what did he just say? Jonathan has lie slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. You know, it's just right there in plain old Hebrew. And I think people just kind of have glossed over it over time. But you know, if you're coming from the LGBT community, you look at that and say, why can't we take this one literally? You know, because certainly the passages in 1 Samuel regarding Jonathan leave a lot to be interpreted about that. You could interpret it as a very special relationship between the two of them. But
Also,
amazing that he says it publicly.
Yeah, and it also, if we, you know, think about his relationship with Jonathan, it would explain some of the grief too.
Exactly.
Like maybe he can't find it to grieve for Saul.
Oh, that's
but
a
I
good,
think
that's
if he has an
great.
emotional attachment to Jonathan, it might,
Right,
like, then you can write a song of
right.
mourning.
So
that
imagine
is-
him at the altar weeping, you know, and they're like, wow, the king really is, he must have been really close to Saul. And
It's like-
everyone's like, sure, right, yeah.
but it's like
This
the-
is not entirely unprecedented though in ancient cultures. A lot of times women and wives were viewed as primarily the ones that passed on the line. They were broodmares in a sense.
Yeah,
They were to give sons, and a lot of times men's relations with other men, especially if they're in the military or something like that, were very, very close. So this is not at all unprecedented. Of course, it led to some interesting things in Greek culture, and you know, as I'm sure you're all aware, you know, the relationship between the soldiers of Sparta and their initiates or their apprentices. So
right.
I see the point, but yeah, this is not an unusual thing to say, even in ancient cultures, that the kind of affection that men have towards one another sometimes was even the greater than the affection they held for their wives, so at least at a certain level.
Yeah.
That's right, and what makes it special is that it's here, it has remained in scripture all these years, and now we look back on it and go, okay, so where did we lose that? There's some kind of social acceptance in some ways that then got clamped down later, probably medieval times, or sooner. It's so interesting, yeah. But you're right, I like this, and we're gonna craft a great movie of the story of modern story where David is overcome with emotion, but he's secretly weeping for Jonathan. Yeah.
Well, the crescendo of this song is Jonathan.
It is, right?
Right?
Yep.
He talks
The how
about
the mighty
Israel
have
being the
fallen.
king,
Yeah.
but he ends with his love for Jonathan,
So great.
however that was.
Mhm. All right. Well, that leads us to chapter 2. Would someone like to read from a different translation? Unfortunately, I've got some big words, a couple of them. Ahinoam, and Jezreel, Nabal, Carmel.
I can read it, but I'm
Aha.
reading the RSV. But
I believe you were so called.
Okay, well, I will pull out my women's Bible. And
Okay.
I'll read out of the CV.
Why don't you read to to verse 11, and then we'll just take a pause and see what we've heard so far. Give your pronunciations.
All right. 2 Samuel 2. 2:11. Okay. Sometime later, David questioned the Lord. Shall I go to one of the towns in Judah? Yes, go, the Lord told him. Which one should I go to? David asked. To Hebron, the Lord replied. So David went there along with his 2 wives, Ahinoam from Jezreel and Abigail, Nabal's widow from Carmel. David also took the soldiers who were with him, each with his family, and they lived in the towns around Hebron. Then the people of Judah came to Hebron and anointed David king over the house of Judah. When David was informed that it was the people of Jabesh Gilead who had buried Saul, he sent messengers to the people of Jabesh Gilead. The Lord bless you, he said to them, for doing this loyal deed for your master Saul by burying him. May the Lord now show you loyal love and faithfulness. I myself will also reward you because you did this. So now take courage and behave and be brave. Yes, your master Saul is dead, but the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. Meanwhile, Abner, Ner's son, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth, Saul's son, and brought him over to Mahanaim. There he made him king over Gilead, the Jeshurites, Jezreel, Ephraim, and Benjamin, over all Israel. Saul's son Ishbosheth was 40 years old when he became king over Israel, and he ruled for 2 years. The house of Judah, however, followed David. The amount of time David ruled in Hebron over the house of Judah totaled 7.5 years.
Okay.
Wow, that's
there. Somebody got forgotten to history, didn't they? Ishbaal.
so we've got 2 kings now.
And a divided Israel.
A divided Israel, exactly. This is kind of what I mean by a little bit of a chaos. It's like red state, blue state in some ways, actually. David, you were cracking a big smile at something there.
No,
Well-
she just actually said behave instead of be brave, so it just was kind of funny.
Oh. Freudian slip, right?
That's the way she talks to me, so I suppose.
Don't be brave, behave. Valiant. Yeah. The NRSV calls it be valiant. For Saul, your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. Yeah, and think of Israel roughly, I would say this, but about the size and shape of New Jersey. And imagine it just being cut at the hemisphere and up, you know, that's effectively what we're talking about, give or take some land, but Judah to the north and Israel to the south. Is that right? I might have those reversed. Yeah.
No, Judah was the south.
Judah was the south. Thank you.
I think so.
Hebron, incidentally enough, maybe I'll pull up a map or something, but Hebron is a real place, remains today, and it's this is where Abraham and some of the other early church fathers and mothers are buried, allegedly. You know, they've built synagogues and mausoleums and mosques over them that you can visit, but that's the town where they're all buried. So it's a special place. David, if you're wondering, is buried allegedly in Jerusalem.
I have a footnote that's interesting to me, but
Oh,
I don't know
cool.
if anyone else would find it interesting.
I love footnotes. Fire away.
Ishbal, his name means man of Baal, Baal, which you think had something to do with the god Baal,
Right?
but it didn't. At the time, it just meant Lord or Master. And so you could call the God of Israel, you could say,
Like Bahal.
right.
Right.
But later times, it became more associated with the Canaanite god Baal.
Yep.
And so they didn't want to call
Which
him
is
that anymore.
sacrilegious. Yeah.
And then scribes didn't want to say Baal, so they replaced it with Bosheth, which meant shame.
Mm.
So Ishbal, now sometimes it's translated as man of shame, Ishbosheth,
Huh.
but it's all because this word Baal went from meaning God to meaning the Canaanite God.
Yeah, exactly.
So
The
I think
enemy
this-
of God.
I think those things are.
That is, yeah, it's fascinating. This poor guy is like, couldn't he have gone with like Jim? Like, a lot better. Thank
Yeah.
you. Don't name me after the god who's controversial. Thank
Like
you.
in several hundred years, this word will mean.
Yeah.
something.
And my footnote says it might have been an epithet, you know, like a epithet, like a racial epithet, you know, like a derogatory epithet built into the poor man's name.
But
It is
mostly
great.
he's forgotten, though.
It's so interesting, yeah. All right, Leslie, would you like to keep going?
That's fine.
If you got the stamina,
I got
yes.
I got both open. So I keep 3 or 4 different translations here, so I can,
Of course.
I like, sometimes when I'm reading, like to compare, because I like to see the different words.
I have the
Okay.
same thing going on here.
So, okay. So I'm starting with 12.
12,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, we'll go a little while. Abner, Ner's son. Oh, I know what I wanted to say before I started
Oh,
reading.
Yeah,
I
please.
really like, what I liked or was interested in saying is sometime later, David questioned the Lord, and it just like God just answers him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I always get this thing is this guy just answers him and says, go to Hebron or go to whatever. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure I hear God's voice powering out
clearly,
that
yeah.
clearly that I have to go do something. But anyway, I just
That's
thought
a
that was
great- No, I'm so glad you named that because it's true. I think it's a great example of that. Which tradition is writing about this. And the tradition that wrote Genesis, for example, 1, with God being cosmic and all that, the same God who talks to Moses from a pillar of cloud and the fire, you know, this is not the same community. This God is very anthropomorphic, you know, is like got him on speed dial. He doesn't send messengers to come talk to him, you know. The only difference is he only talks to the anointed ones. So the prophets like Samuel, but Saul even had trouble. He, you know, he'd reach out to God in his own way and get static. This just shows how favored David is in God's eyes. Yeah. But as we know, that can change. That can change. Yeah.
Okay.
According to the Hebrews. I'm not saying that that's our faith. It's just it was a past part of our faith. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Great observation.
Abner Ner's son, along with the soldiers of Ishbosheth, Saul's son, left Mahanaim to go to Gibeon. Joab, Zeruiah's son, and David's soldiers also came out and confronted them at the pool of Gibeon. One group sat on one side of the pool, and the other sat on the opposite side of the pool. Abner said to Joab, "Let's have the young men fight in a contest before us." "All right," Joab said, "let's do it." So the men came forward and were counted as they passed by, 12 for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, Saul's son, and 12 of David's soldiers. Each man grabbed his opponent by the head and stuck his sword into his opponent's side, so that they both fell dead together. That's why that place is called the Field of Daggers, which is located in Gibeon. A fierce battle took place that day, and Abner and the Israelite troops were defeated by David's soldiers. Now Zeruiah's 3 sons were present at the battle: Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Asahel was as fast as a gazelle in an open field. Asahel went after Abner, staying completely focused in his pursuit of Abner. Abner looked behind him and said, "Is that you, Asahel?" "Yes, it's me," Asahel answered. "Break off your pursuit," Abner told him. "Fight one of the young warriors and take his gear for yourself." But Asahel wouldn't stop chasing him. So Abner repeated himself to Asahel, "Stop chasing me. Why should I kill you? How could I look your brother Joab in the face?" But Asahel wouldn't turn back. So Abner hit him in the stomach with the back end of his spear. But the spear went through Asahel's back. He fell down and died there. Everyone who came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died just stood there. But Joab and Abishai went after Abner. The sun was setting when they came into the hill of Ammah, which faces Giah on the road to the Gibeon wilderness. The Benjamites rallied behind Abner, forming a single unit. Then they took their positions on the top of the hill. Abner yelled down to Joab, "Must the sword keep killing forever? Don't you realize that this will end bitterly? How long before you order the troops to stop chasing their brothers?" "As surely as God lives," Joab replied, "if you hadn't just said that, the soldiers would have continued after their brothers until morning." Joab blew the trumpet, and all the soldiers stopped. They didn't pursue Israel anymore, nor did they continue to fight. Abner's men then marched all night through the wilderness, crossing the Jordan River and marching all morning until they got to Mahanaim. Joab, meanwhile, returned from pursuing Abner and assembled the troops. 19 of David's soldiers were counted missing, in addition to Asahel. But David's soldiers had defeated the Benjamites, killing 360 of Abner's soldiers. They took Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb in Bethlehem. And Joab and his men marched all night. When daylight came, they were in Hebron.
Right.
Actually,
Thank you.
I'm going to read.
You go ahead. You're right.
The
There's
next-
a discrepancy there too.
The war between Saul's house and David's house was long and drawn out. David kept getting stronger while Saul's house kept getting weaker. It just seemed like it stopped there.
Yeah, exactly. Whoever split the chapters, there's some disagreement about where that split happened is what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautifully done with all those big words, all starting with A.
Yeah.
All these names. But the important one is Abner. Remember Abner, we don't like Abner because he's that cranky first in command, kind of the consigliere to Saul. So, I mean, it's funny because I absolutely have no recollection reading all this before. You always think it just skips straight to David, but David has to work for it because all of the Saul supporters like Abner are still fighting, in the name of Saul, in the bloodline, right? And Abner's probably going like, "Hey, I actually have a claim to be the military leader, at least, of Israel and Judah, so why don't I fight? But it's not gonna be easy with Asahel dying. And this some of these footnotes I'm reading in Robert Alter's book are pretty enlightening. He says, verse 32 says all night long, perhaps the reason for this forced march through the night is that Joab's troops want to get safely out of Benjaminite territory, not entirely trusting the truce that they've just made. Here's something else funny.
In the CEB, this is entitled Conflict Between Judah and Israel. I think the first few paragraphs should be titled Toxic Masculinity. Who gets together and says, let's choose 12 and we'll have them go at it to see, and they all kill themselves. They end up dead. They kill themselves.
Oh, right, and that image is so, they take so many words to describe an image of two people stabbing each other at the same time on the side, and they just put it kind of both fall over. It just sounds like exactly what you're saying, the fruits of this toxic masculinity.
I was kind of thinking it's one of those like a just so story that
Yeah.
you tell little kids. It's like, well, why is this called the field of sword edges?
Exactly.
Like, oh, let me tell you, there was these 12 men and they got another 12 men, and they couldn't tell the whole little story of it.
Right.
Because it's a very detailed
It's
little
true. No,
vignette.
it's so true,
just to
yeah.
explain it.
And this happens in the New Testament too, when they talk about the field of blood where Judas hung himself. Somebody was obsessed with this, the answer to this question, you know, or maybe some buddies.
Yeah.
And you have to think they kind of wrote this in committee form. And as they're finalizing what they're going to put in the scroll, somebody is going, you know, pulling their hair out going, you've got to put the part about Field of Flints in there.
Yeah.
And they're like, all right.
It's interesting that so many of these places are named after these acts of incredible violence.
Absolutely.
Warfare and things like that were such an integral, such a part of their culture that it's just in place names all over them, you know,
Right.
the map and biblical account.
You know, and this translation I'm looking at has Ishbaal named Ishbosheth, which is I think how Leslie was reading it too. So I think again, thinking of the worshipers in the temple hundreds and thousands of years later, if they heard Ishbaal, they would have thought Baal the god.
Right.
And they would have it's like in a sermon where when I name a movie reference, that I walk a fine rope between reminding you of the movie to serve the point of the gospel or making you think about the movie the rest of the sermon. Which I sometimes find out afterwards when I shake hands. I just want to talk about the movie. Same thing here, you know, if they had somebody, I think, made the decision probably historically, or I'm sorry, not historically, but maybe more in the writing or composition of the text, that Ishbaal was problematic to listeners because they would think it was something like okay, wait, so they named him after a Canaanite god? So they go, how about Ishbosheth, which means son of shame? And then they'll get that part of it, but not dwell on it too much, right? Just all of this, everything, when we notice these little things like that in the field of flints and all, it's so great because it's like we're archaeologists and we're finding out about a bit about who the people were telling the story. That's really who you are. Well, we're not quite Indiana Jones, let's be clear, but we're finding out about our listeners, which is really arguably the way I describe the Bible to people anyway, which is you're really learning more about the people who wrote it than you are about some of the stuff inside, some of the text inside contained in.
So did Saul have a lot of other sons, or was the one, whatever his name is,
Ishbosheth.
Ishbosheth, is he the only other son other than Jonathan, or were there other sons? Was he the
I
oldest?
can't name his family tree off the top of my head, but I have a sneaking suspicion there are many sons and many people claiming to be his son too, for all the reasons we've mentioned about the wives, the many wives and all were there. It's all, you know, it's not, what do I want to say, with all this warfare and territories and tribes, you might want to think of it as the king sowing his wild oats, literally to kind of get his bloodstream into the into the various factions so that, you know, he can, or not, you know, but who knows, but whatever it is, that's what's happening, so that everyone can have a claim to the kingship, you know.
And that's what's interesting because, you know, David, of course, was the anointed one to be the king, but at Jonathan's death, that made him move in, but
Right,
why not the other sons?
yeah,
I
So
mean,
far,
did
it
it
sounds
have
like-
to do with who the mother was?
yeah, exactly,
Because maybe it might have been the first wife was the mother of Jonathan, and so that was precedent, and the others were secondary and didn't matter as
yeah,
much.
yeah, and there's precedent
that's
for
why-
that with Jacob and his two wives.
Right.
Yeah,
And that's what I was wondering, because, you know, today, if you could relate it to a monarchy,
right,
it doesn't matter.
right,
You
yeah.
know,
Jake,
but,
you know, in Genesis, Jacob has a relationship with Leah
mhm,
and has a child through it. So technically that's the oldest.
right,
But Leah was, you know, not as,
not his chosen.
not the chosen like Rachel, the one he
Right.
actually fell in love with.
Uh-huh,
And then her children with him become the 12 tribes, right?
right.
So
So it's kind of
Leah's over there
interesting.
going like, I was-
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
same
I
with
was
Abraham
first, my
too.
son's first.
Abraham and his illegitimate son Ishmael.
Uh-huh. But
Same
that's
story.
interesting that there were other sons and they weren't considered, you know, what really was the hierarchy at that time.
Yeah, exactly.
Although, you know, the road had to be made for David,
Yes.
but still, you
Yeah,
wonder
'cause they-
how that all played out.
There's no, I don't think so. This is another one of these Gregisms that I need to back it up with some research, but my hunch is because it's not quite Greco-Roman times yet when this was composed,
Mhm,
there's no real history or historian, you know, there's no Pam Bloom, there's no
yeah,
libraries like that, like we think of. And they don't have some of this lineage down in the detail until it gets into scripture like this. So,
well, and the only thing is, the only people that did read and write at that time were in the temple.
right,
Everybody else, it was verbal.
yes, exactly.
And, you know, you say something to Charity, Charity says something to Barb, and by the time it gets to me, it's not the same.
Right. Well, it's like, where did the messenger story come from in chapter 1, since he killed the messenger, right?
Right.
Clearly, there were other people witness to that.
However, all the weather forecasters today sure do.
Yeah,
Whether they know it's
a
biblical or not,
meteorologist would read this.
but a
and be like,
meteorologist
"Yeah, I
like,
get
yeah, I guess I say that a lot.
that." I feel you, brother.
Don't kill the messenger.
So, yeah, I don't know if there's a definable lineage for Saul, especially because the history was replaced
Hmm,
with David's line.
right.
He was,
So,
he was Saul's only remaining heir, according to the notes I just read. He was the
Okay.
last one that was remaining, so, whether that was with which wife or not, but so he was the last of Saul's line, so that's why Abner chose him.
I
Or,
see.
you know,
Got it.
supported him.
Yeah. And probably because Abner felt he was someone he could manipulate or, you know, be kind of be the almost the acting king for a kind of a weaker man, maybe.
Possibly, or just the fact that Abner had been with Saul for a long time, he was definitely Saul's man.
Yeah.
So I, you know, it's hard to tell his motivations. It could be either one though, Greg, you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
Sure.
could kind of be like when King George was in England and the people that came here, they were the governor of an
Yeah,
area, but
Exactly.
they were representing the king.
The crown, right,
Yeah.
until the revolution.
Mhm. Yeah, kind of in a similar type situation.
Yeah. Wow, well, what do we got? Oh, we got a little bit of time. We can read in. I know it's dangerous because then next week I'll be like, where are we?
I just one thing.
Oh, yeah,
But he's interested and I don't know, but I.
always.
It has the family tree of David.
Oh, there we
Oh.
go. Of David, yeah.
Wow.
So I don't,
Maybe I can scan it and put it into the, while we're reading, I'll take a
okay,
picture or something and then we'll
yeah, it
text
just,
it.
it has, I don't know if anybody else has it.
That's great, yeah.
What
Yeah,
is
I
that?
have it. I have it too. I just didn't say anything.
All the women's
Yeah.
Bible.
Yeah, so that's the CEB.
Yeah,
How many is Bible?
okay,
Great.
just, it might help.
Oh,
It
yeah.
helps me just by that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I'll read chapter 3 from Robert Alter's translation. So this is you'll have some funny things in here. For example, when Leslie was reading, there was a line, I think it was in verse 20, when it was really vivid writing, but Asahel, there we go, is being chased by Abner, and he's kind of looking
Mhm.
back, being like, something to me.
Leave me alone.
But the phrasing, I think that kind of gets watered down in English is, he was, getting ahead of him or escaping, but Robert Alter's translation is almost a literal Hebrew to English translation, and this is how they described it. And Asahel chased after Abner, and he swerved not to the right or left in going after Abner. It's just such a weird way to say it, right? And he swerved neither to the right nor to the left,
Just-
straight as an arrow, right? Yeah. Yeah, gazelle in open field. I mean, they're painting these almost as they're talking about them, because they're just legends in their community. It's amazing. Okay, so chapter 3, we'll see how far we can go here. And sons were born to David in Hebron. And his firstborn was Amnon by Ahinoam the Jezreelite. And the second was Chileab by Abigail, wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And the third was Absalom. This is going to be an important figure. Absalom, son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. And the fourth was Adonijah, son of Haggith. And the fifth was Shephatiah, son of Abital. And the sixth was Ithream by Eglah, wife of David. These were born to David in Hebron. All right, let me pause there. So flag this one, and we'll get a scan of Barb's page, and I'll email it to everybody. But here, when we're wondering who all the sons of David are, we've got a good, nice list here. Although we're missing a key name who is yet to be introduced yet, because he has not been born yet.
And all different moms.
All different mothers, all different mothers. Such is the way of the world, right? Some of these women we've been introduced to already, but we've not really talked about their sons. We've met Ahinoam and Abigail. I don't think we've met Maacah yet. Maacah. But Absalom is a significant figure, so flag that name. And it happened during the fighting between the house of Saul and the house of David that Abner kept growing in strength in the house of Saul. And Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why did you come to bed with my father's concubine?" And Abner was very incensed over the words of Ishbosheth. And he said, "Am I a dog's head attached to Judah? Today I have kept faith with the house of Saul your father, with his kinsmen and his companions, in not handing you over to David, and you dare reproach me with guilt over the woman today? Thus may God do to Abner, and even more, as the Lord has sworn to David, just so will I do for him, to transfer the kingship from the house of Saul, and to set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah from Dan to Beersheba." And he could not say back, not a word. Sorry, this English is so confusing. And he could say back not a word more to Abner in his fear of him.
All right.
Pause. Yep. What happened there turned into a soap opera.
The message?
I would love the message.
That's when I have to read the message.
Yeah.
It says, Abner took advantage of the continuing war between the house of Saul and the house of David to gain power for himself. Saul had a concubine, Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. One day Ishbosheth confronted Abner. "What business do you have sleeping with my father's concubine?" And Abner lost his temper with Ishbosheth. "Treat me like a dog, will you? Is this the thanks I get for sticking by the house of your father Saul and all his family and friends? I personally saved you from certain capture by David, and you're going to make an issue out of me going to bed with a woman? What God promised David, I'll help accomplish. Transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul, make David ruler over the whole country, both Israel and Judah, all the way from Dan to Beersheba. And if not, may God do his worst to me." Ishbosheth, cowed by Abner's outburst, couldn't say another word.
Yeah.
That one made more sense.
It did, yeah. But basically, kind of what we were kind of circling around was, Abner's he's a little bit of a snake. And here he is finally kind of going, "Hey, I've been loyal to this house forever. and you're treating me like a dog. And in my footnotes, it's saying that the Hebrews thought a dog was the antithesis of the fierce and regal lion. So dogs were, remember Jesus saying to the woman about the crumbs and the dogs, the dogs were not beloved house pets back then. They were wild Roman streets, eating like the cats too. None of these were domesticated. So they looked up to the lions, they hated the dogs. So that's kind of why that phrase comes out there. That's how Abner's feelings have been hurt, but also Abner is clearly taking advantage of some of the trappings of being king, and he's caught in that.
I think that makes it pretty clear what you were referring to is probably quite a bit the case, that Abner was looking out for the main chance. He was looking out for himself, but giving him any kind of loyal intentions to Saul and the Saul's line, that doesn't seem quite as likely in light of what just happened.
So and then he comes back with a threat. I'm fine, I'll switch my allegiance to David, and then where will you be? That's effectively what he's kind of saying.
So did,
I was just going to say real quick, because when you slept with someone's wife or someone's concubine, it wasn't just a physical thing. That's literally taking some of their authority, saying, that, this was the king's, now what was the king's is now mine. So,
right. It's akin to, they slept in his bed, or put on his clothes or something like that. Yeah, driving his car around. Exactly. Yeah. Stealing money from his upper drawer.
Is this saying that David became king over both Israel and Judah, or was he always just king over Judah?
I think it's working towards that, but I don't think it's there yet. I think there's more text to come. I don't think it's going to be that easy of Abner just being like, and now I'm on Team David. I think he's used that more as a threat. I could be wrong. I was just scanning a little bit ahead, and I think there's some more dealings. Well, let me read this last little paragraph, and then we'll call it a day. How about that? This looks interesting. And Abner sent messengers to David in his stead, saying, to whom should the land belong? Make a pact with me, and look, my hand will be with you, and bring round to you all Israel. So in other words, Abner's making good on his threat. And he said, good, I shall make a pact with you. But one thing do I ask of you, namely, you shall not see my face until you bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come to see my face. And David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, saying, give back my wife Michal, whom I betrothed with 100 Philistine foreskins. Remember that?
Oh.
And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, from Paltiel, son of Lesh. And her husband went with her, weeping as he went after her all, as far as Bahurim. And Abner said to him, go back. And he went back. So, effectively being treated like a slave, the women here, and by, the man who clearly loves her and is weeping, as she's being taken away. She's a spoil of war, and she's going to David. So, David's smart. He's like, what can I get out of this? And that we've already established that he and Abner have a icy relationship. So, back to what David was saying about concubines and wives and these things. These could be viewed as humiliating to Saul, but adds to David's strength, which is kind of the theme that's going on here. In fact, that phrase earlier, let's see, where it said Abner was gaining strength. Where was that? Beginning of chapter 3. Well, there was a part somewhere in there where it mentioned Abner gaining strength, and that was intentionally to react.
At the end. It was
Yeah,
at the
okay,
end.
yeah.
The war between Saul's house and David's house was long and drawn out. David
Mhm.
kept getting stronger while Saul's house kept.
There you
getting
go.
weaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all the same exact
It's the
word
very
in Hebrew
first.
to kind of be, it's like a little bit of a chess game, Yeah. Fascinating. It is scripture. However, the phrase, it contains all things necessary for salvation, but it also contains a lot of things not necessary for salvation. definitely applies here. I mean, this is not stuff that's read on Sunday. It's all war and battle intrigue. It's all legend making for David. It's answering questions no one was asking. Like, what about the field of flints? But there, if you're looking for the thematic or theological thread throughout, it's that remember that God is on David's side, and even when God's not in this discussion, that's kind of what's going through. So you should feel a weight of dread about Abner, because something's not going to go right here, because David's always going to come out on top so far. And then the footnote on verse 16 about the husband weeping. This is Robert Alter's footnote. There is scarcely a more striking instance of the evocative compactness of biblical narrative. We know almost nothing about Paltiel. He speaks not a word of dialogue, yet his walking after Michal, weeping all the while, intimates a devoted love that stands in contrast to David's relationship with her. Paltiel is a man whose fate is imposed on him. Michal was given to him by Saul, evidently without his initiative. He came to love her. Now he must give her up. And confronted by Saul's strong man with the peremptory order to go back, he has no choice but to go back. Just all these little threads that would just be a wonderful like B storyline in a movie, right? It's so cinematic. It really is. But they've had practice telling a story in their settings, teaching their young boys to be soldiers and stuff. They tell the story.
Yeah, one could easily argue maybe that these Old Testament accounts, they formed the pattern which the cinema later adopted.
Yes, yeah.
It's been talked, that the myth of the hero, what was his name? Joseph Campbell. He's got
Right.
a book that writes
The
about
hero
that, how
journey.
all stories basically are based on heroic stories are based on the myth of the hero. And
That's right. It's absolutely right. And I've said it before, but Game of Thrones is George R.R. Martin is not that inventive. What he invented was all these characters and names, but the storylines are straight out of so far 1st and 2nd Samuel, and I've seen all there is of Game of Thrones. Whether he did it intentionally or not, it's there. It really is. Especially all this talk of houses and what happens to the society when the king is removed. It's fascinating. All right, we'll pick it up next week. Thank you, everyone. Have a
Stay
great
safe all.
Wednesday. Take care, Dawn. Bye, Susan.
Bye-bye.